Welcome to Strength Chat Podcast, presented by Kabuki Strength. Introducing your hosts, Chris Duffin, the mad scientist of strength, Rudy Cadlove, mature athlete and coach, and the wizard of training himself, Brandon Sen.
Welcome to Strength Chat with your host. That's right, the mad scientist of strength, myself, Chris Duffin. To my right, he is back. We thought he'd gone off to, who knows where mature athletes go, but our mature athlete
the
and
mature
coach,
athlete,
Dr.
in the sky.
Dr. Cadlove is back with us.
You gave him his seat back.
I got my seat back this week too. Yes.
Oh, the
Brady-
tall one to make you look taller.
Brady stole my seat last week. I had to sit in your seat, and it was very, very problematic.
It's uncomfortable.
It
not being the center of attention.
That's right. And to my left, the wizard of training, Brandon Ross, is with us. Brandon Sen is with us today.
Ooh, what's that name?
What?
What?
I missed something.
That's not even his
I didn't
middle
even say
name.
anything.
Oh, Chris is not quite awake this morning yet.
Not quite awake.
We've been here waiting for him and been sleeping on the couch all morning.
Yeah. And I have been here waiting on you guys to set up so that we can do our pre-meet or pre-call.
Can't even get your words out. You're so tired.
Let's switch subjects.
He stumbled over strength this morning.
And now Andre left the room. What are we going to do?
What did you have in that little blue plate there? It looks like something that had sugar on it.
It was banana bread with massive amounts of butter on top of it. So it was really good.
That's your problem. Your tongue is stuck to the roof of your mouth.
That might be.
So did you have a good week? Did we have a good week this week?
We had a pretty good week. I mean, we did have some product damage. I think that happened. That was unfortunate.
You bent another bar?
No. We had these. We had a whole bunch of nickel shoulder rocks. Our very, very nice nickel shoulder rocks.
Oh, I heard about this.
Yeah. They were sitting up out back. I don't know, Brandon. You might be better to tell this story.
I can tell the story.
Yeah.
It's also secondhand because I wasn't there, but I'll do my best to stretch the truth as far as I can. So,
as once you would be when it comes to Mr.
Now,
Andre.
mind you, before we get into this story, there is a certain Romanian technical director around here who has
IT manager.
IT manager. We're not going to use his real title because that would.
Well, is there really any real titles?
So he bought a new truck this last year.
The Toyota Tacoma.
Yeah, it's probably got like 15,000 miles or something on it at this point. Probably less than 10. But the rear bumper, it has some. It's probably got like $250,000. I mean, he carries around a replacement rear bumper in the back of his truck.
Yeah.
Because the first rear bumper is like completely destroyed, which makes no sense because it's got a backup camera and stuff like that. But
it's a small truck too.
It's a small truck. Yeah,
It's not even a big.
it must have like 5 different hits on this thing.
At least. And
It's
you can
completely
tell.
destroyed from one side to the other, and not just one incident. But we got to observe firsthand.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
we are now the victim of that truck.
I know.
So,
Or the driver of the truck.
according to our wonderful warehouse managers and everyone in the back, Brady,
There were
Jesse,
several witnesses. Yes.
There's many eyewitnesses on the scene. Andre, also, this is Andre's first time ever really driving a truck in his entire life. He came from a little hatchback, so everything to him is off-roading.
And a skateboard.
Yeah. So what happened was he's parked in front of the gym. He shifts into reverse and goes all the way around the building in reverse the whole way. Why? We don't know. But he's doing it. Jesse's on the forklift, and he sees him heading straight for the pallet of freshly plated shoulder rocks. I don't know how many are on there.
Shipping labels are already printed for these.
They're ready to go.
They're getting ready to go in a box and ship that day to our customers. Yep.
Our very, very nice nickel-plated shoulder rocks. Andre's heading right for it. Jesse goes, oh, my God, he's going to run it over. Tells Brady to look. Andre's full speed ahead. Swerves at the very last minute.
Full speed in reverse.
Yeah, in reverse, yeah. Swerves at the very last minute. Narrowly avoids it. Great. No one saw that coming. until he puts it in drive and goes all the way over it, going straight forward.
Just drives over him.
And now we have scratch and dented shoulder rocks for sale
For sale to
point.
some fortunate.
So yeah, some point in the future we'll be having another scratch and dent sale with about 7 nickel
And
shoulder rocks.
now you know
in
why
inventory,
companies
so.
do scratch and dent sales.
Because they have Andres with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They have ruthless employees that don't care.
No.
Just
Well,
don't
we-
care.
I could add to the banter and the trashing of Andre today.
Yeah, let's do it.
Now, do we have time to do this?
Well, we can make a whole
I'll make
show
it
out
quick.
of it.
So I asked Andre to come last week. My HDMI cable got busted at home and goes from the receiver under the house and up to the TV. So it's about a 30-foot long run. He said, just buy one off of Amazon. Don't go to Best Buy or one of the big shops and pay $80. He said, they're all the same. It doesn't matter. So I order one. It's there the next day. He comes over yesterday to help out. And God bless him, he goes under the house and gets all dirty and strings it all up and hooks it all
He's
up.
trying to get a raise.
He was great. And so we go fire up the TV and everything, and then the TV comes on and it's just sputtering and blinking and popping and so we track everything else. Guess what was wrong? It's the wrong HDMI cable. It's
cheap-
not.
it was the cheap
There's
cable?
the cheap one that he said to get. He said they're all the same. It doesn't matter.
Our IT guy couldn't even get it right.
That's our IT guy.
Also, the guy who photoshops me and everything.
No, those aren't shops. Those are real.
Sorry.
Well, there's
Once
got to be
it's-
there's got to be one Photoshop in there because I know there's not two of you.
Yeah,
I know there's not two of you.
fewer people caught that than I thought would. What a slow audience.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're boring the heck out of our guest today, so let's get.
But doesn't it just feel good?
It
to
does
talk
feel
about
good.
Andre? Doesn't it just
Notice
feel?
he left. He knew
it
we were
start
going
a-
to do it, so he left the
It's-
room.
he knew
Monday
this,
morning.
He knew this was coming.
Monday morning, it just feels good.
Yes. Back to more management by antagonism at Kabuki Strength. Yes, our non-PC ways.
We love our
But-
Andre.
My guess is he's going to be much better at backing up from now on.
No way.
No.
He's got a replacement
Well, it
bumper.
sounded like
He wasn't got to
the
lose.
backing up part was pretty good. It was the going
yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
It was bad.
Okay, so today's podcast, we're really pleased to have on Cal Dietz. He's the sports performance coach at Minnesota, co-author of Triphasic Training, and owner of the XL Athlete. Pretty short intro, and I'm going to kind of leave it at that because a lot of our audience is going to know who Cal is. So welcome to the program, Cal.
Guys, thanks for having me. I might take a vacation out there and just hang out for a week. The way the office sounds like a great place to be actually and work.
Just don't bring
yeah.
any valuables.
You'd leave with a smile on your face, that's for sure.
Well, you're
Well, I mean,
you're welcome anytime. So
So I'm surprised you weren't here this past weekend when the Golden Gophers were beating up on our Oregon State Beavers here.
yeah, no, I did not make that trip. I worked with football 20 years ago. Now my main situation is hockey. I worked with 12 different teams while I was here, so have a broad spectrum of different sports, and kind of makes up my background. But nope, hopefully Coach Flex got them going in the right direction. So
Sounds good. They sound like they're pretty good.
well, we'll see.
It's a tough conference.
Big Ten, all of them get a little tough, and the mountain you have to climb seems to get higher every day.
well, Cal, let's start off with some simple discussions today. So you and I are both the member of a same email group by chance, and I have to say, the emails I get from you are quite impressive. So it's an email group. A lot of research, is sent out on, and I swear Cal is in the group just so that he can, the owner of the group can get these beautiful summaries of the research sent back out to everybody. So Cal does just a fantastic job of summarizing the information. But a lot of the discussions in the group are around nutrition, recovery, things of that nature. And I just wonder, and it actually kind of came up in the discussion there, but I don't think you chimed in too much on it, was, in team sport applications, how do you have an impact on athletes when it comes to some of those choices around diet and nutrition, because it seems like a challenging environment to really affect an athlete, or particularly college athletes, to drive change in that manner.
Ooh, yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think you kind of have to get to know the kids and what motivates them. You know, I have females, so I have females who the last year's team had 5 Olympians maybe on it. And then there's walk-ons on that team who aren't as motivated maybe, and I have college athletes who are just happy to be on the team, and on the same team you got guys that have been drafted in the first round. So it's a broad spectrum, and the motivation levels are tough. The biggest thing I think is just to get to know the person a little bit and hopefully see what motivates them. Some of it may be legitimately saying, hey, if you don't lean up, I'm going to tell them to cut you. You know, hopefully that's not your best athletes. And then if the other ones are, hey, it's really my message on delivery saying, hey, this is how it's got to be done. Literally, it's frustrating because I'll tell a kid something, his buddy's standing there, and then his buddy will say it a different way that the kid actually gets it. So that becomes delivering that message home and make it usable. How can I say, hey, look, I'll be honest with you. Most kids coming into college, in my opinion, they lack protein for breakfast in the morning. Let's just be honest. No, a bagel is not protein. That's legitimately some of these questions that they have.
If it has cream cheese.
Well, right. Yeah, but you're a 200-pound male that trained hard yesterday. You need to get your metabolism going. And that's what I find. Even if they do have some carbs and protein, some carbs and fat, the metabolism will slow down a little bit in the recovery ability in regards to what I can track in regards to heart rate variability and just different processes of healing over the course of the day. It actually becomes hindered a little bit. So that's kind of a little frustrating if they don't get some protein. And usually I find, honestly, I think within 15 minutes of getting up in the morning, it's important to get that process started with some protein, whether that's aminos or some simple way to get in there quick. And then finish the amount of protein that you have, whether it's 20 or 30 more grams for breakfast or maybe even 40 or 50, depending on your size.
Yeah, that's what's going to be my next question is what's going to be what are, one of the same things that you see lacking in your athletes or some of the priorities in regards to nutrition and diet supplementation, those sorts of things?
Especially at the college level, I think just, they don't eat enough varieties, first of all. That constant, eating's your job, and you know what? You can see these kids that take ownership, and they make huge gains. Like they don't understand. They see a huge change in one summer. Well, they worked just as hard the summer before, but didn't see that. It's a complete nutrition package. So you can come to the arena and work out 20. You can work out 2 hours a day. But ultimately, it's the other 20 hours that make you your athlete, as you guys know, the rest, recovery, and really the less drinking an athlete can do and make those right decisions. Because, some of these kids, some of them are beasts, they're high testosterone, naturally driven, and they can get up and do the same workout the next day, But you know what? You're just not going to recover as well. Now, they're mentally tough enough to keep grinding, but they don't understand that if you can come in every day fresh and recovered, that the alcohol, if they just limit that to 2 or 3 drinks at the most, it's optimal if they don't do any. But that's that culture that I think is a struggle in the college, where the team has to have a good culture. And that goes year to year. Who depends on who your leaders are within that organization. And I'm not saying the coaches usually do the same job every year. It's the kids that we've got that are the leaders that'll set the tones. I have 4 Olympians leading this team, future Olympians, and you're going, yeah, things are done right. That's the frustrating part, as you guys know. The commitment level as an 18-year-old. How we're committed were we as 18-year-olds? Most of us.
That's a pretty valid point. So
committed to, well, it depends. I was committed to a lot of things at 18, but maybe not focus on that.
Right. Yeah, I was committed too, but and then some things I was involved. It's kind of that story: ham and eggs for breakfast. The pig's committed, the chicken's involved. You know what I mean? There's a difference between the two. So.
Yeah.
they makes that, at least that makes them think. But yeah, the hard part is just, we're fortunate though at the University of Minnesota, I'm able to provide training table a lot of the time. So especially on road trips, you get all these meals taken care of. So the variety, it's just, it's a struggle with teaching them new habits, the misconceptions of nutrition. And then when you can get to the professional level where I struggle with, let me give you an example. I had a pro who was eating all the right things, in my opinion. Breakfast, he had a great organic shake with organic coffee from Guatemala, shade grown, whatever. You can get it all into the whole deal with that. But he kept getting bad HRV readings. Couldn't figure it out. So after 3 days, I switched him up to Go Protein and green tea. Great HRV readings. After great HRV reading, after great HRV reading. So I began to realize it might be the shake. So, and this guy was a $25 million athlete, so he could afford anything he wanted. And his wife took classes, did the whole deal in regards to, making sure he ate right. While we did a food intolerance test, he was actually allergic to to the coffee and the whey protein. And then what we realized when we did the food intolerance, he was allergic to all the foods he actually ate. So then he had a gut dysfunction problem, so we had to go back and fix that. Obviously, we changed his foods out for a while, and then once we got the gut fixed, we were able to basically reintroduce the foods, and he was able to get back on the foods that he was eating. But again, the heart rate variability didn't tell me there was a food problem. It just shows that there's a problem. Now, you can do that with actually resting heart rate on some hacks. You can do, sometimes your blood pressure will spike up too. So these are all just things to look at in regards to changes within the body. I try to find as many hacks. So if you don't have a $20,000 heart rate variability device like I do, you can use other things to guide you in regards to figuring out that there's something not right about what you're doing.
Yep. There are some pretty economical HRV tools out there. I haven't used any for a number of years myself, but I think that's pretty interesting storyline there of identifying an issue, but with the HRV and then changing one variable that had most people would never look at or think about, and then leading you down that path.
Well, I mean, you know what? After I educated him and we found this out, he's like, you know what? There was something about that breakfast that didn't sit well with me. Didn't get an upset stomach. He just said he just changed the way he felt. So realistically, if you look at it, he actually had a histamine release because he was allergic to those foods. So then with the histamine release, it increases the heartbeat, the resting heart rate.
Yep.
So maybe a little sweating, maybe he didn't notice it, maybe he didn't. He was in really good shape, resting heart rate of 36 in the morning. But there was something that didn't feel normal about that particular meal. So that was the trigger that, that there's just all these stories that I have and these things. And, I've tested heart rate variability on people 6-8 times in one day. I've kind of tried everything in that regard to see how some of the things I do. Hey, you take a supplement, I'll retest you. Sometimes your body doesn't like that supplement, even though it works for the next guy.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know why, but we have a testing policy. We test and then we retest, and I try to do that with everything that I can, just to see if the system's working.
Yeah, definitely a pretty useful approach if you got that tool available. Are you using one of the original Omega Wave units?
Yeah, that's the one I have. Yes, and there's others that are very good now too. So, but I use the original. I bought that thing. I didn't tell my wife, so she calls me. Hey, did you buy a $20,000 device? I said, well, I kind of did, yeah. That didn't go very well at my house. So I actually bought my truck the same week, and I didn't tell her about that one either. So yeah, I was sleeping with the Omega Wave in my truck for a day or so. Just a proof point.
But was it worth it?
Oh yeah, it was worth it. And then she goes, well, what's it doing? I was like, you know what? I truly can't tell you yet, to be honest with you.
That's even worse. I'll let you know.
That was even worse. So it got better, you know what I mean? So I had a number of pros start working with me on it, and so then she was like, well, you should probably buy another one now, because people were paying me to actually, use the information. So it was like, well, I'm good. I got one. I don't need another one, to be honest with you.
Did you use that device in testing as your development of the triphasic training system?
Yeah, you know what? It confirmed a lot of things when I got it. So I think I got it 7 years ago, and obviously the triphasic system was developed basically in the track and field world and swimming, where I was able to, with some track coaches that I had, we were able to try the concepts and see if we were getting results, because everything's measurable. As you guys know, in like powerlifting, you'll know what works because it's measurable. And there's so many other sports that aren't, like football. There's so many variables. It's not necessarily measurable. Baseball, hockey's a bad one where, I've had many of these pros get slower over time because they're 36 years old, but they can still play hockey because they know the game very well. But in track and field and swimming, we had some crazy results. I was fortunate to work with some great athletes. 2 kids ran the world's fastest time about 2 weeks apart. So we knew the system was correct. That was about 15 years ago. And then the Omega Wave would come in, and it would just kind of confirm some things that I knew, especially in the off-season training. I think training's some people shifted towards not applying enough stress. And as you guys know with your system and how you guys work, stress is the ultimate adaptation tool. And so many people have gone, like a quick story. I had a female in my program for 4 years and I do 120% super maximal loading at times. And she was 132. She did safety bar single leg squats with 355.
That's pretty impressive.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Your resting heart rate was right around the 34, 32s. So she goes to the national team test, did really well. They said, hey, can you do our program? And the national team's program was more of, let's say, a functional kind of base program. And so she goes from safety bar single leg squatting that much, 355, to kettlebell swings of 16 pounds.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So then there's not much stress. So then a few months goes by, they retest her, and all 11 tests got worse. And they're like, well, what happened? She's like, I did your program. Well, to tie into the Omega Wave, I was watching her during this process, and there was no parasympathetic response to the training. So she, if you just drink a coffee, you'll get a sympathetic response. But in training, you may get a huge sympathetic hard stress, you'll get a sympathetic response. But if there's not enough stress, you'll get no parasympathetic response. That tells me you're not training. The body didn't think that workout was actually a training session.
Yep.
It was a light jog or something, whatever it was.
Yep.
So for 3 months, she was untrained. And I saw that, and I didn't say anything. I just kept saying, yep, let's keep doing your program. And lo and behold, I just proven my own point, I guess.
Right.
Yep. So
these are pretty basic training concepts there,
But people forgot that. That's just Foundation 101 was, Hans Seeley, just apply stress so that the body has to adapt. And that's what people have just, they create all these neat exercises. But if that exercise doesn't change the tissue, cause a metabolic response, I don't know what it's doing. And I'll be honest with you, some of those exercises don't do anything because there's not enough stress.
We argue that point all the time. Now, we teach a lot of them, but our whole thing is like do them in a couple minutes as preparation if you need them for proprioception, cueing, a little bit of firing, whatever. There may be some particular reasons for you. But then the point is get to training. Because training gives you the stress that you're going to get adaptation from. You can't take any athlete and put them on, this corrective, bandwagon and expect them to have any sort of response to it.
There is no response to it. And it maybe is.
It doesn't mean that there's not necessarily a place for those things here, but they're not a training methodology, and they've got to train to enact change. Maybe we need to make some things happen better with training, and those are going to help with that. But at the end of the day, they still have to be training.
There's no skill. Those exercises might have a little skill development to get the right patterns going, to just get you ready to do the heavy lifts.
Yep.
But that at best, and I haven't even seen much balance developed out of them, to be honest with you. Because here's my catch: when I put them on balance plates, people don't get better, especially when I take the eyes out. So when you do the balance testing on a force plate that takes 400 or 500 readings per second, and you take the eyes out, it really didn't make them any better in their balance either. And I've checked that for weeks on end, and it really didn't do anything. So if there's a balance problem, I've actually found through a lot of functional neurologists, and it's actually a brain problem in many cases that you actually have to fix with various exercises that functional neurologists do. So now you'll get better maybe with your vestibular system, because with your eyes open, people can have really good balance.
Mm-hmm.
But the second I close their eyes, they go from the 98th percentile with their eyes open to the 50th percentile with their eyes closed. Now you have a huge difference, because people are very good at compensators, especially the athletes that I deal with. You can check their balance with their eyes open and their money. The second you pull their eyes out, now we have a problem. And that's, and I never saw those exercises for balance, even, standing on a ball looking like a circus clown, maybe, whatever it is, doing things like that.
There's no value.
Yeah, zero, right.
Yeah.
So
It seems, I guess what I hear you saying, and it's sort of a repetitive theme, is that as technology improves and there's a focus on strength and conditioning, people are always looking for that edge, coming up with new techniques, exploring new ways to do it. But sometimes are we overthinking it? And if you really get back to the basics, I mean, I grew up in the day when, you lifted, X amount of weight this week, and then next week you lifted X plus 5 or X plus 10, and you kept going. It was called progressive resistance. You kept stressing and sure enough, you keep getting stronger. Are we overthinking some things these days?
I truly believe so. Where do all these rehab and prehab exercises come from? The physical therapy, but again, there's not much stress, and with that concept, Rudy, you're just sitting here. You're going, if we would just find out why it works. Let's talk about the deep cellular level stuff. You're going, science has now proven why a lot of these things work that we do when we apply stress. We just want to know those mechanisms. I think what we got to do is truly refine, like some of the techniques that we know works. And, is it rest intervals? Is it the number of reps? How can we get, because really you want to train with the minimum effective dose. So get the greatest response you can that day with the least amount of training. And there's small things like, in my system, I'll train for time. We only train for time because we're trying to not cross adapt various energy systems. So we'll usually train for under 10 seconds. We'll train over 10 seconds for lactate, and then aerobic is done light and continuously. But, the hard part is many people just forget that concept of applying stress. Now, how do we apply more stress? There's always new techniques and findings when science comes out, because I think science, like these scientists right now are currently behind in the sports world, 10, 15 years behind coaches, and coaches just used a simple stopwatch to make sure that they were getting results, right? Mm-hmm. It was pretty simple. Yep. Where the scientists are like, and then they sometimes it irritates me. I go to these conferences and they stand up on these pedestals and they think they're above us all because they're into the science. But I'm like, you haven't done anything to help me in my last 15 years of coaching. You just helped me confirm what I know. Why don't you help us develop new methods and concepts? But they don't have enough coaching experience in my book.
Exactly. It's a big thing. I mean, I'm big on studying and research, but you also have got to be a doer. And that's, you've got to have the experience, the hands-on in the trenches experience as well. You have to have both. And yeah.
Yeah. So if you've never been there, there's just a huge disconnect. Yeah. Huge disconnect.
So that kind of tails into, the triphasic training as a whole. Can you, for our audience that isn't familiar with it, kind of give a rundown of some of the basic concepts and also dive into a little bit behind what makes it work?
Yeah. So triphasic, there's the main part of it is basically a three phases of training, and all human movement is basically broke up into three parts. It's the eccentric dynamic human movement. So if your foot's landing on the ground, your quad goes into an eccentric loading so your knee doesn't collapse. And then for a brief moment in time, there's a brief isometric contraction through that quad, not all at the same point. And then the concentric movement. So triphasic training, I just took the dynamic movement in sports, whether it's throwing, running, jumping, hitting, and broke that into blocks of training. Basically, I spend 2 to 3 weeks of doing eccentric training at the first. I do 2 to 3 weeks of isometric with the movement. Now, this can be the squat. So obviously, you can do 2 weeks of eccentric squats going down nice and slow, and then the isometric, and then the concentric phase. And that's basically in its simplest form. And I've tried it in every different way. I had to, crack a few eggs and make an omelet. I've screwed it up so many times, but when I got it right, finally, I got the results in track and field and swimming in those sports. And you start with the eccentric basically because when you go down nice and slow, it takes the actin and myosin head and tears them apart. And then what will happen is there's an immune system response to rebuild that whole thing. So if you do your blood test during that time, your white blood cells are up. This is how we know it's working. And you're basically trying to remodel that tissue to make it a stronger tissue during that 2-week time frame. And for example, there's nutrition part of triphasic, which we're working on. I have it all laid out. I just got to get somebody to write the book. And what transpires is, if you eat the right foods, you actually recover from that eccentric damage that you've done, because it is damaging the muscle, the actin myosin heads. They actually come back and are built thicker. So now the muscle has tension or more tensile strength. And then after you've remodeled the tissue for 2 or 3 weeks, you then go into the isometric phase, which you go into your weakest position and you isometrically hold it. Now people say, hey, the isometric system, you're only strong in that position. Yes, but if you get the stronger in your weakest position, you'll be stronger through the entire range of motion eventually. It'll all transpire because, the researchers and scientists will come to me and say, hey, yeah, but you only get strong for 15 degrees. I'm like, yeah, but if you get buried by 300 on your bench press at the chest, if you get stronger there, then now you can bench 330 or 340. I don't know anybody that can't lock out 340 if they can bench 300. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Whatever. So now that in the eccentric phase, you make that tissue more resilient to injury. Then the isometric phase, you make that tissue stronger as you possibly can. And then the concentric phase is where you just dynamically go up and down with heavy weight, light weights, whatever you choose to be. And you will ultimately move that weight faster is what we found. Now, the thing about triphasic is it's more of an off-season training. So let's say, for example, in powerlifting world, you're going to do that you're going to finish triphasic right around 6 to 8 weeks out from your meet. Then you would do your normal peaking protocol. It's not necessarily an in-season training. You do it in season for sports, but for a one-time deal, an event, you actually do triphasic about 14 to 8 weeks out in that time frame to help the athlete get stronger. Some examples, I had 5,000 hockey practices one season, and we had one soft tissue miss during the whole season. People found if you can just make that tissue stronger, more resilient, by specifically hitting very specific stress, and as we talked about, which is the eccentric and the isophases, you're going to get new tissue that is less likely to get injured. You also do some remodeling, some lengthening of the tissue. The eccentric component does lengthen the tissue up. It makes it more resilient to heavy loads.
It's interesting because I follow baseball a lot, and I notice how the high frequency of hamstring tears early in the season. And I'm wondering if they were using a triphasic approach to this eccentric approach to remodel that in spring training, there'd be less of it, because as the season goes on, we seem to see less of that injury at the MLB level.
Well, so here's the connection with triphasic and the interaction. I forget the guy that did this study. I lectured on it, but if you sit here and understand that there's a 2-spring model system in the muscle and the tendon, for example, and the various tissue within the muscle, so the fascia. And what you have is if one of the springs is the muscle, and one of the springs, let's say, is the tendon fascia. If one of those systems becomes super strong, it beats the other one up. So, for example, when I explain this, you have a power lifter who, let's say, never does any high-speed movements or truly dynamic. It's always grinding slow. It doesn't train his tendon. So high-speed movements like light loads, bringing a bench press down fast, let's say at 50% with bar speed, doing it dynamically, he'll train the tendon, because when that let's say it's 250 pounds comes down fast, it pulls those tendons. And that's how you train the tendons, by high-speed running, plyometrics, or explosively loading them. Now, heavy loads train the muscle, so 90% plus train the muscle. Now, the problem becomes if you just train the muscle all the time with the heavy loads, the tendons don't adapt, and that interaction between the two tissues become less. So what you have is the muscle becomes super strong. Now, power lifters will tear the tendons quite often. Okay. Now, the other end of that spectrum is you see these combine guys and these coaches that will only train people for speed. So they're only training, the tendon becomes more stiff. And then when these guys go to training camp, what do? They pull hamstrings and muscles. It's because the other spring of the tendons is beating up the muscles. So the tendons become too stiff and the muscle can't handle the forces from the tendons. That's why the muscles become injured. So the unique thing about triphasic is it takes you through those phases so that you can train both those qualities in the right sequence, in the right order, so that you're less likely to get tissue injuries throughout the season. And then once the season goes on, as you mentioned, Coach, is that your actual tissues will regulate themselves based upon the demands in the sport. So that's why you won't necessarily always you won't have too many hamstring problems at the end. But the problem is you haven't prepared them correctly for the tissues to be ready to play at the beginning of the season.
You mentioned that being mostly an out-of-season style of training, so you're probably not super concerned about losing the qualities built in either the isometric training phase or the concentric training phase. But do you think there's any application to doing either pieces of the block or jamming some of the qualities of that entire block into the in-season training to hopefully maintain some of those qualities gained?
Yes, that's exactly what I do. So really the first semester, my kids hit 2 triphasic cycles in the off season at 120% load during those times. And then we will probably hit 2 days of eccentric at some point. It doesn't have to be back to back. I'll do it on a Monday usually, farthest away from the game. And we play Friday, Saturdays, and then I'll do maybe, and if we have a really tough team that next Monday, I may not do that. And then if we have some teams that I feel we should be able to beat, I may throw it back in. But then I'll just hit 2 days of eccentrics during the season. The first semester, I'll hit 2 days of isometrics during that first semester. And then I'll cycle through the high loads or the speed loads when we're training between 80 and 25%. And then ultimately I'll readdress that one more time before the season ends and to peak them. And I do readdress those qualities because you're actually getting eccentric strength when you do a dynamic movement. It's just not as specific as it is in triphasic. So, and really some of the animals that I've had a few of these kids that were freaks. The one guy that was amazing shot putter, he had a 44-inch vertical at 260. He was 6'4", back squatted 660 for me, raw, no belt, no wraps. And you could see when he couldn't absorb the eccentric forces when he came down, you would see him not be able to transition. So I would literally do one eccentric day with him, and the next time he did his dynamic back squat, you saw he had that ability. So you can actually break that up into just specific needs on the individual person. Doesn't necessarily always have to be a block training method. You can just apply it when you need it. Once you guys know, once you see that a good coach has, with all this experience, has that ability to see what that athlete needs, And I would see him go rock bottom with 660 on a college kid at 6'4". It's pretty impressive. And you could see when he couldn't transition, I'd throw one eccentric or isometric day in, and boom, he had it the very next time he squatted. So.
Yeah, heavy eccentric work has always been pretty popular in the rehab world, especially with knee injuries and that sort. Can you give our listeners an example of what you're doing for eccentric training? Is it a really heavy squat that you're taking all the way to the bottom, or what are some common things that you're doing with your athletes?
One of the best lifts I've actually shifted to. Now we won't do deadlifts. We'll do basically squats, RDLs. We can do the safety single leg bar squat. I found reduces the loading. So we'll basically get into a single leg squat. And when we're doing 120%, we will not put our foot up on the bench, our rear foot elevated. We'll keep a split squat. And we'll go down while we're holding on to something, because I'm not necessarily concerned with balance at that point, holding those loads. I have some pretty awesome kids, a 185 pounder doing 600 on the safety single leg bar squat. And you're really just trying to specifically tear that muscle apart on that left leg. So, and they'll go down for about anywhere between, probably 7 and 10 seconds on a rep. And then we help them up, and they'll switch legs. They'll do the other leg, and they'll go back and forth a couple times, especially with 120% load. I have a pretty elite thrower who this summer hit 800 on a safety single leg bar squat.
Holy crap.
Yeah, well, you'd be shocked how fast people adapt. And the reason I like the safety bar, it takes the load out of it for the spinal part of it, but I can really get a huge adaptation response when I say that on the tissue in the leg. Now, the other thing that transpired was I saw huge hormonal spikes. I've confirmed this with some blood testing. But if you have 800 on your safety bar single leg squat, and then you use that, your body releases a lot of hormone, which is the exact thing we want to happen to cause adaptation. My opinion, kettlebell swings don't necessarily do that. I think we could all agree to that. The reason we train heavy weights is to cause a hormonal adaptation. And then, I didn't know right away it was happening, but, the males came up to me like, Coach, I don't know what we're doing, but when I wake up in the morning, I know there's something going on. You know what I mean? This is a self-reported testosterone increase. And they're like, yeah, this thing's waking me up in the morning, Coach.
Chris mentioned you guys had an email thread going that he was pretty impressed by you about. I wasn't sure if this had anything to do with it or the heavy eccentric work.
New conversation.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if that was tied in somehow. We don't need to let our listeners know what you guys are into.
Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest arguments, or not arguments, is the things that was brought up was about recovery. You want to talk a little bit about maybe what I said in there, Chris? Should I cover that a little bit?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Well, I think some of the misconceptions is, everyone's worried about, okay, let's say you go do kettlebell swings, and then they say, oh, okay, now we got to recover. And I'm like, recover from what? I don't know what we need to recover from. If you did a workout that didn't cause a huge heart rate spike or load the tissue. My argument's always been I don't want necessarily to do recovery in the off season because my athletes need to learn to recover on their own. So the story I share often was that I took one of these athletes with HRV and I started following him. I didn't train him, and he needed to recover during the whole NHL season. Well, the next year I had him actually pull his recovery during the summer, and he struggled at first. It took a while. By the end of the summer, I was getting some pretty good readings while he was training hard. And then we didn't implement recovery methods that next season, until he actually needed them. He went to the last 2 weeks of the season before he actually needed to start recovering before the playoffs started. So just by pulling the recovery that he would always do, because he was committed, but it wasn't the right thing to do because his body used the recovery methods to recover instead of adapting on his own to recover from the stress that he needed. So I made him more resilient by doing no recovery in the off season, and then he could handle more stress in the in season, the plane flights, the travel, the training, the game after game. And so the big thing for me is just because there's a concept out there doesn't mean you need to apply it all the time, even though it sounds like it's a good idea. But that's how I use heart rate variability to only recover when I need it in season. Now, you get to the end of the season, I'll probably spend the last 2 or 3 weeks recovered no matter what, because I'm just going to make sure we're recovered. But it's not going to have a negative effect on adaptation in the last 2 to 3 weeks minimum before the season ends.
Right. Yep. I think it's good to have that continual test and measure, approach, test and retest. And, you can definitely see the outputs and what you've come up with. We do our own, how we monitor our training with some auto regulation and subjective measures as well. I think it's really important, and people kind of miss the boat a lot of times with that, and just try to go by feel.
Yeah, well, the hard part is these athletes aren't always honest with themselves.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And you guys know, you have an athlete walk in and you can say, man, he doesn't look good today. His posture, his eye function, the way he walks in, the way he's communicating with me, and I'll say, hey, how you feeling? He'll be like, oh, I'm great. And look, he's an animal. The kid's going to play in the NHL for me. He's got that mindset that I'll deal with it. But when I test him, I find out otherwise. You know what I mean? And I'm like, hey, we need to modify something here. You're not ready. Your capacity's gone. Something's wrong. And it could be a number of things. I've seen things from obviously family issues, boyfriend, girlfriend stuff. It's mind-boggling what stress.
It's all additive. You just brought up the flying and the travel and the all that comes into play. I mean, I've been doing a lot of that stuff this last year for me, and Brandon knows it definitely affects my recovery without a doubt, and we see it in our tools how we measure.
Well, I mean, you get off the plane, you go get a hard workout in. It's instead of recovering in 24 hours, it may take 48 if you're in a negative state going into the workout, doing the same workout as I often default to aerobic work from basically about 110 to 130 beats per minute. I find that helps regenerate. The entire organism is basically based off the aerobic system. Even your short sprint repeated ability, creatine phosphate phase is obviously your alactic system depends on oxygen to recover itself. And if you don't believe me, just as you're doing the podcast, just hold your breath for 5 minutes and let me know how that works. Right. I mean, it's only obvious, and the big thing for me is my GPP system that we'll put out here in the next few months. And you can actually find part of it on my blog is how can I get my world-class shot putters to not build an aerobic base so that they can train harder? Because if you have a sound aerobic base, you can actually do more sets and reps. And that's always been my goal. But I can't make them go run 5 miles because it tears up their legs, So, so I sat there and I'm like, okay, so I just put my kids under 50% load on the bench press, do 1 rep, get up, go over to the back squat, do 1 rep for 50%, go back and forth for 10 minutes. Their heart rate will hold about 145 beats per minute, maybe even 150 for a 10-minute set. That's aerobic training. Now that shot putter loves to do that. I've actually used that method for a number of teams in the NFL tried it with their linemen. So they do 3 or 4 sets of that during the course of a workout where their linemen are actually just doing singles back and forth at a pretty good clip. Some of my wrestlers actually even went up to 70% load for singles back and forth, holding their heart rate around 150. And you do that for 40 minutes total. That's like a 40. What's the difference between a 40-minute jog at 150 or lifting weights for 40 minutes with a heart rate of 150? Your heart adapts the same. It's the same thing. I'm just not killing their legs or making them weaker by jogging 5 miles. I don't know how the hell long it would take to run 5 miles, to be honest with you, but I haven't done that. So, but the thing is, there's just no difference in the aerobic training effect if you're lifting heavy weights. And a physiologist will say, well, that can't be that. A physiologist at Minnesota will say, well, that Cal's methods are wrong. And I'm like, well, you explain to me what the difference is. And they can't. Obviously, they can't. It's just because they only know running, because that's all they do is run. They're weaker than than baby kittens. So
aerobic training, that's something that's become pretty popular recently in even the strength sports world for exactly what you said, for increasing their work capacity in the off season. So I've even found myself programming in walking for athletes either as recovery modality or incline walking as a form of off-season GPP, just so they can do more work once the actual important training comes around. So that's actually something pretty cool that I've seen just from observing other coaches and different things on the interwebs that are happening.
Oh, you're exactly right. You just become more resilient to stress if you have a great aerobic system. The problem is you don't want to do too much aerobic work so that you interfere with the strength or the other qualities that you want to develop. I mean, and I've actually, just speaking of walking for recovery, I found that if you just do a 20-minute walk, now it's got to be separate from the workout by about an hour or two. So just in the evening, if you can tell them to go for a 20-minute walk, that's been a huge recovery tool. Just by adding walking. Now, obviously, you'd like to get a meal in after the workout, and people say, well, can I do it right after the workout? No, it doesn't work. You actually have to have the body calm down a little bit. And then the secret to all this recovery is, if you really look at it, it's blood flow. You're just increasing new blood, oxygenated blood with various substrates into the muscle that you wouldn't get laying on the couch. That's what these vibration platforms do. That's what the massages do. They increase the blood flow. Saunas, everything just increases blood flow, and that's the benefits of that. So if you separate your workout and then you wait about 2 hours minimum to do a walk, I've gotten some pretty amazing recovery results from those particular just a 20-minute walk.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I've been doing in my own training the past 4 weeks or so, is going for a walk after all the training sessions. And I haven't done anything to measure it, whether that's via Omega Wave or other HRV modalities, but training's been going great. Tissues feel good. Bodies feel good.
You could measure the circumference of your calves and see.
They're getting bigger.
Are they getting bigger?
My dorsiflexion's improving from all the hills as well.
I almost thought I saw a calf on him the other day. So.
My calves are literally calves, if you follow.
That's like
it's like a Mini Cooper on each leg.
That's calf. That's a calf is a baby cow, right? So
that's right.
So you have the strength of a baby cow. Is that more than a baby kitten?
No, the girth of a baby cow. In more places than two.
Now I lost track of where we were.
Well, we're actually 50-some minutes into our podcast, so we're getting close to the end here.
You know, if we're going to close up on one thing, I'd like it to be this. Kyle mentioned something earlier that I don't know if you guys caught. He said, if you're too tubby or too large, you're off the team. And I think I will start implementing that into my own coaching. So, Chris,
you're fired.
This is your notice.
No.
If you're overweight, you're off the team.
No.
You're cut.
Rudy's belt is loose on me, by the way. I know this for a fact.
I got no beef with Rudy.
Actually, you left your belt out on the floor on
I didn't
Saturday
see you have
morning.
any protein in that.
I used your
all
belt
butter.
Saturday to deadlift.
It's probably
with Chris.
margarine.
I had piles of sausage before that.
I bet you did have piles of sausage before that. Yes. Is that last night or?
Shut up. So, Cal, where can people find you if they want to find more information about, obviously your book, Triphasic Training, some of the upcoming stuff it sounds like you've got coming out. Where follow you on social media? What's the best place?
I'm usually Dietz, Dietz, on all the social media, and then Excel Athletes, my website I have up there. I'm trying to revamp that now. So I just busy being a coach. It's tough to keep up with everything. You know, it's this is my third job, is the side stuff, or fourth, who knows. So I do appreciate you guys having me on, though. It's been great. I think I will have to take a trip out there, maybe just hang 3 or 4 days.
Oh yeah,
minimum.
But your book's available on Amazon, is that right?
Yeah, Amazon or Excel Athlete. And then my email is the same, caldietz@gmail. I mean, everyone in the free world seems to find it, so you should be able to, you know what I mean? You should be able to find me. It's not that hard. I would say if I don't get to you, email me in another week, and then I'll usually get to it the second time if I see your name twice. So some people put on their free beer, and I usually answer all those. You know what I mean? So I open it right away for whatever reason.
I'm going to remember that one because I had to do the 2 email trick to get the podcast scheduled. So
Yeah.
free beer. Just kidding.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and actually, I think we'd like to talk to you again further. Maybe after some of the next pieces get released would be good. So
that'd be great. I'd love it. I'll send you guys everything. So
all right,
really appreciate it, Cal.
And I was going to see if you could hang out for just a second too. So But
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Cal.